Belgium is perhaps home to some of the most unique and unusual steam locomotive designs in the world. With so many weird and wonderful engines to choose from, it can be hard to pick out a design that stands out from the rest. But among the square funnels and odd boiler proportions, the Belgian-built engines that seem to stand out the most are the ones that are unmistakably Scottish. In 1895, John F. Macintosh took over as the chief mechanical engineer of the Caledonian Railway. Having worked around locomotives his entire life, he proved to be well versed in engine design and quickly produced several new locomotives for the railway, such as the Class 19's. In 1896, he produced his most iconic engines, the 440 Class 721 Dunalastairs, which were effectively beefed-up versions of Dougal Drummond's own 440 engines. These proved to be both fast and powerful machines, with Macintosh so sure of their performance that the first lot were built without brake hoses on their buffer beams so that they couldn't be double-headed. Later, in 1899, he produced the 812 class, some of the railway's most well-known 060 locomotives. Because they had the same boiler as the Dunalastairs, they were very good at raising steam and could reach up to 55 miles an hour. The engines were primarily built for goods work, but were known to pull passenger services and even boat trains from time to time. Many of Macintosh's locomotive designs were well received by the railway, and remained in service long after the Caledonian was absorbed into the LMS. Their popularity, however, wasn't just limited to Scotland. After the death of Alfred Belpaire, management of Belgian state railways was messy. Many locomotives the railway used were outdated and in need of replacement, but the new engineers struggled to design anything capable of meeting the railway's needs. Since designing engines from scratch was proving difficult, the railway decided to look elsewhere for inspiration, primarily France, Germany, Britain, and the US. As strong, high-speed passenger engines were needed, a team was sent to Britain to study many of the inside-cylinder 440s that were becoming quite common at the time. The team took a particular interest in Macintosh's Dunalastair locomotives, so much so that they approached the Caledonian Railway and ordered 5 Type 2 Dunalastairs for use in Belgium. The Caledonian agreed, and the engines were built by Nielsen Reed & Company under Macintosh's supervision in 1898, with a few minor tweaks to make them compatible with Belgium's railway, such as changing the driving position to the right. They were tested in Scotland before being shipped over to Belgium in November, where they proved to be more than satisfactory. So much so that in February 1899, Belgium State Railways decided to build another 40 engines, followed by another 50 later that year, these engines being classified as the Type 17's. It wasn't just express engines the railway needed, however, but also suburban and local passenger locomotives. Since the Type 17's had proven to be more than capable, the railway figured they might as well just use them for the job, with a few modifications of course. Starting with a Type 17 as the base, it was given smaller driving wheels, smaller cylinders, its tender was replaced with water tanks and a bunker, and a pair of trailing wheels were fitted to the rear end, giving it a 4-4-2 arrangement. Classified as the Type 14, the first batch was built in 1900, with another batch built alongside them with slightly shallower fireboxes known as the Type 15's. An alternative version of the Type 17's came about in 1902, this being the Type 18's. These were essentially copies of the 17's, same wheel size, same cylinders and so on, but with a slightly longer wheelbase allowing for a bigger firebox, bigger boiler and an alternative cab design. Since Belgium had a larger loading gauge than Britain, it meant they were able to expand in all directions, allowing for more flexibility when it came to modification. The introduction of superheaters a few years later allowed for more powerful locomotive designs, resulting in another redesign of the tank engines and the tender engines, leading to the creation of the Type 16's in 1905 and Type 20's in 1908. The Dunalastairs, however, weren't the only Caledonian engines Belgium took an interest in. With need for some better mixed traffic locomotives, the railway once again turned abroad for inspiration. The Class 812's began service in Scotland in 1899, and since their boilers were the same as the ones used in the Dunalastairs, Belgium took interest. That same year, 12060's of a similar design were ordered to be built in Belgium for use on their network, with 12260 engines ordered from Baldwin in the US in the meantime. The Belgian-built engines were classed as the Type 30's, while the American imports were known as the Type 31's. The 30's shared a lot in common with their Scottish counterparts. Same length, same layout, same valve gear, even similar cab designs, with the only real difference being the 30's fireboxes were shallower, cylinders were 13mm narrower, the wheels were 4mm smaller, and the controls were arranged differently than those of the Scotch engines. They were otherwise essentially clones of the Caledonian engines, but found themselves pulling passenger services more frequently than their Scotch counterparts. After the American engines were tried and found to be disappointing, Belgian State Railways wasted no time ordering another 70 Type 30's. The design was developed further in 1901, which resulted in the creation of the Type 32's. These were basically the Type 30's again, but with better boilers, bigger cylinders, and many of the typically British design elements that came with the Type 30's replaced with more familiar Belgian designs, such as the cab, tow bar, and sanding gear. A total of 502 Type 32's were built between 1901 and 1908, with yet another variation of the design appearing in 1905 in the form of the 32S. These were the same as the regular 32's, but with superheating equipment fitted to their boilers to give them a boost in performance. 307 of these engines had been built by 1914, making for a total of 891 Caledonian-based 060's across all three types. The types 14 to 20, meanwhile, was made up of 342 locomotives spanning all six types, meaning for a while a large percentage of Belgium's locomotive fleet was made up of Scottish-based engines. They had their quirks, and the Dunalastair-based designs especially suffered from wheel slip, but otherwise they proved to be exactly what Belgium needed. Curiously, despite Belgium being home of the Belpaire firebox, all of the modified designs retained their Scotch-style round-topped fireboxes. Alas, Scotland's reign over Belgium's railways couldn't last forever, and by 1918 the tides were beginning to turn. During their time under the ownership of the State Railways of Prussia during the First World War, many of these engines were worked hard without proper maintenance, cannibalized for parts, or were damaged in combat. The Type 30 and 32's especially saw the worst of it, as they were often sent down the line unmanned by saboteurs with the aim of crashing or derailing to block and disrupt enemy supply lines. The war decimated their numbers, and afterwards, many of the remaining Type 17's found themselves on secondary duties after being replaced by the Type 18's, and by 1932, all of them had been withdrawn. The 18's and the 20's kept working until after the Second World War, but these too were steadily being replaced with bigger, more powerful engines, and were completely gone by the end of 1949. Many of the tank engines managed to fare much better, with most of the Type 14, 15 and 16's surviving until the late 1950s and early 1960s. The Type 30's suffered a similar fate, the last of them going in 1932, leaving only the 32 and the 32S's. Like with the First World War, enemy attacks, bombings and sabotage greatly thinned their numbers during the Second World War, with the last of the 32's being withdrawn in 1949, while the 32S's managed to keep working until 1959. While no Type 17's or 30's were preserved, a handful of their descendants did manage to evade the cutter's torch. After being withdrawn, if their boilers were still in good condition, the engines were used as steam generators for stations, workshops and carriage heating. A single Type 16, 18 and 32 remain along with two 32S's, though I will note that the 32's were reclassified as the Type 44's while the 32S's were reclassified as the Type 41's in 1931. The Macintosh engines of Belgium tell an interesting story of collaboration. While strikingly different to many of the Belgian locomotives that came both before and after them, they were just the engines the railway needed to keep things going. The influence they had on Belgium's future locomotive designs too cannot be understated, just going to show that sometimes a little help from abroad can help fix some problems back at home. Subscribe for more.